Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. In today's show, we speak to a UK parliamentary delegation who visited Taiwan and dig into Taiwan-UK relations. Bob Stewart MP is the leader of the UK All-Party Parliament Group and a member of the UK Parliament's National Security Select Committee. Colonel Bob Stewart previously served in the British military in Bosnia. Taiwan Talks caught up with him when he visited Taiwan toward the end of March. I begin by asking why visiting Taiwan matters.
And I came in 2016 last time, and now I'm here again bringing members of Parliament. Why we're coming here? We're coming here to try and make sure that more British members of Parliament know about Taiwan and how incredibly invaluable Taiwan is to the West.
And what makes it so invaluable?
Because it is right on the front line. It is on the front line between democracy and autocracy. And autocracy seems to be in the ascendancy at the moment, particularly right now, with China actually seeming to ally with Russia. And actually, the implication for Taiwan, possibly that the Chinese will, or the Russians will not help Taiwan. Frankly, we've got to help Taiwan as much as possible. We the British, actually are hugely in favour of Taiwan. I consider this place to be not just on the front line, but an example of how democracy should work. Look, Taiwan in 30 years has come to be the 10th or the 12th most democratic country in the world. And then you look at the United Kingdom. 800 years we've had a parliament, and you know what? We're about 10 places behind Taiwan after 800 years. Taiwan has done incredibly well over the last 30 years to have such a democracy. And then you look at the happiness index of the world, and Taiwan scores hugely highly there too, the top country in Asia for people's happiness. That is what politicians are all about, helping the people have a good life.
In the UK, they're looking at the fate of Hong Kong with interest, obviously, because of the very close relationship and history that territory and the UK shares. How about Taiwan's fate? How is that being watched in the UK?
Exactly the same by people like myself and my colleagues in the All-Party Group, and our job is to propagate more knowledge of what's happening.
A recent study, a Singaporean study, found that it's incorrect to say that most countries adhere by China's One China principle. What's the UK's position?
The UK's position is slightly towards that, I'm afraid to say, politically or diplomatically or in governmental terms, but it's not the same in Parliament. In Parliament, we're very much more in support of Taiwan. I personally and my colleagues want Taiwan to be a full member of the United Nations, and we also want them to be members of the World Health Organization and that sort of thing. Now, the reason why countries are so compliant with what the People's Republic of China want is because of their economic power. And frankly, I find that a bit sad. Because we should stand up for democratic values. 45% of the world, 45% of the people in the world live in democracies of one sort or other. Not the highest level, like Taiwan, but in some form. But 39% of the world's countries are actually not democratic, and that generally means people are more miserable.
Not always, though. In terms of China's economic power, the UK had a role, contributed to that rise.
Yeah, I'm afraid it did, because China produced goods that were actually much cheaper than we could produce, and we helped contribute to the wealth of the People's Republic of China, and so in a way we're slightly to blame for the growth. But you know, the one thing about the Chinese is, I also recall, because I'm old enough, I remember the Great Leap Forward and all this sort of thing, and Mao Zedong and etc. One thing about the Chinese that was really good is that I don't think people starve like they used to in China anymore. And certainly in this country, people don't starve. They're very well looked after. One of the points we've picked up when we've been here is how well Taiwan looks after its minorities. People who are disabled, for instance, or have a problem mentally, or are, you know, in some way broken. This country looks after them very well indeed.
Now, China has called your visit, let me quote, a gross interference in China's internal affairs and a serious wrong signal to Taiwanese independence separatist forces. How do you interpret that?
With joy. That's exactly what it is. We are here to support Taiwan. And please, China, get this message. We will continue to support Taiwan. We're not here to interfere with China. All we ask is that you allow the people of Taiwan to continue in the way they are acting and make their own decisions. After all, national self-determination is a keystone of what the United Nations is all about, which makes me really quite upset when actually the United Nations says that 24.9 million people in the world can't be a member of the United Nations proper. What the heck's going on? That's a dichotomy.
And actually the UK government's position is that the dispute between Taiwan and China should be resolved peacefully or through dialogue.
Well, that's the position of the people of this country too.
Exactly, yes. I noticed that in your speech to President Tsai Ing-wen, you compared Taiwan and the UK as islands, both as islands, and you said that the UK is an island off the mainland of Europe, and Taiwan is an island off the mainland of Asia. So some people may have been expecting you to say China, but you didn't.
Well, I don't think China has a sovereignty issue over Taiwan. Taiwan should determine its own future, and that is the end of it. I was rather hoping that the Chinese would move that way, actually, because Taiwan has got a great deal to teach my country. For instance, something that we've picked up in our visit here, the Taiwanese government can actually change things much quicker than the British government can do. We tend to move at the speed of a striking slug, but the Taiwanese, look what happened during the SARS epidemic and COVID-19. Look how fast the government here worked. That's impressive, and that's something we can learn about. And indeed, China could too, if it was to actually consider Taiwan as a friend. It's full of people that speak Mandarin, who are Chinese in origin, and should be friends. This is not an enemy of the People's Republic of China. This is a country that is actually related to the People's Republic of China. It doesn't want to be a part of the People's Republic of China, clearly. But, you know, that shouldn't stop China saying, well, let's get some sort of decent relationship and let's be in a position where we mutually benefit from one another.
However, China won't actually enter dialogue with President Tsai Ing-wen, with the current government, because it requires the current government to say that it is part of China.
Quite. And it doesn't want to do that, and it's quite right to say that, because the people of the country, which this current government represents, don't want that to happen.
So China has said openly that it won't renounce the use of force to take Taiwan. You know, when you heard those statements from Xi Jinping, from other communist leaders, how significant was that for you?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, it doesn't surprise me. They will keep, what do politicians always say? We'll keep all options on the table. That's what politicians always say. It doesn't surprise me that they say that, but they ought to actually just pause briefly and look at the example of what has happened in Ukraine, where the Russians thought that they could actually rapidly advance into Kyiv, take it within 4, 5, 6 days and take over the country. And they're still bogged down over a year later. There's a lesson there. Please don't try it with Taiwan, because actually history sometimes isn't quite as people that think they are in the ascendancy hope it will be.
China's recent narrative is to say that countries like the US have changed their position on Taiwan, on China. But Randall Shriver told me that it's actually China that's changed its approach. He said that the US entered into their One China policy on the understanding that China would take a peaceful approach, like, as is the UK government's policy, that there should be a peaceful approach, dialogue, both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So this is a very significant development and change on the part of China. Do you believe that the international community actually recognizes that?
Yes, I think it does, and I think it's worried about it. But look at what Japan has recently done. Japan has said what matters in Taiwan, it matters what happens in Taiwan, implying that they actually do not want Taiwan to be taken over by the mainland Chinese. They don't. And frankly, I repeat what I said earlier, which is it will not be a walkover, to use an English phrase, a walkover, if the People's Republic of China was to try and invade this place. And I hope they never ever get tempted to do so.
Bob, what do you think of ex-President Ma Ying-jeou of Taiwan going to visit China?
He is free to do so, and no one can stop him. But can I just say one thing? If you go, please do not allow it to become a sign that Taiwan would capitulate to mainland Chinese wishes. You do that, I would hope he would go there to try and convince the People's Republic of China that actually it's in their best interest to be friendly with Taiwan.
Bob, in Parliament you said, I quote, "The Chinese intention is clear to make the whole South China Sea national waters of China." Now, Taiwan, or the ROC, actually also has a historical claim, but it's not pursuing these claims. Do you see Taiwan as a domino in the region? So do you see that China has, greater territorial ambitions beyond Taiwan?
Of course it does. I mean, that's it. It wants to actually dominate the whole of East Asia and the world. It considers itself to be a great nation. It is a great nation. Let's be clear. It is a great nation. But, it's not just Taiwan, it's the Philippines, Japan, Vietnam. They are quite resentful of the fact that Chinese forces seem to be taking over islands like the Spratlys and the Parasols and putting airfields on them. That's not acceptable. They shouldn't be doing it. And it's not just Taiwan that objects, it's other nations in this region as well.
This is the third time that you've visited Taiwan. What impressions or memories will you take back to the UK this time?
Firstly, may I just say how incredibly nice and friendly. We were taught in English lessons not to use the word nice, but I think the people of Taiwan qualify there. Everyone smiles, everyone is welcoming, everyone is decent. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I think the government do pretty well. We've been impressed by the people we have met in the government. We note, by the way, as an aside, that there are quite a lot of women in very high positions in government, and that is impressive.
Okay. Bob Stewart, thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks today.
Thank you.
We heard there from Bob Stewart saying that Taiwanese have the right to decide their own future rather than being dictated to by Beijing. My next guest is Chun-yi Lee, an assistant professor in politics and international relations at Nottingham University. She is also the director of Taiwan Studies Program at Nottingham. I put the issue of self-determination to her here. Bob Stewart there told me that the Taiwanese have the right to the UN's principle of self-determination. However, Beijing says that the future of Taiwan will be decided by the Chinese on either side of the strait, the 1.3 billion Chinese. What do you say to that?
Right. Well, what the Chinese government said is what the Beijing government think about it. But I think one really should actually look into the UN principle of the self-determination. It's a self-determination of the population of the area, that is Taiwan. So what we should actually listen to and to be decided by, it's Taiwanese people's determination to be them own or to be back to China. So it's more important, and I think it's actually the key issue of how Taiwanese people think. And that should answer the question of the self-determination principle.
Could you tell us about the reaction in the UK to Emmanuel Macron, the French president's trip to China, and especially his comments about Taiwan?
It is very interesting that back home in the UK, there hasn't been much of the comments of Macron's trip to China. I would suggest that it's because of Macron's trip actually overlapped with Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen's trip to Central Americans and then stopped over in New York and California.
So were you surprised at all that there wasn't more coverage of it?
My perspective is, if that is an indication of the Brexit, why we would take much of the care of the French president said about that. It's more about what UK government would think of the Taiwan-China issue.
And going to the Simon McCarthy meeting and Tsai Ing-wen's trips to the US and transits, how was this portrayed in the British media?
To be cautious and precise, I would say that it's a neutral but slightly supportive to Taiwan. You can see the in-between underlying supportive of the UK media in that sense, to see China as aggressive power, to treat Taiwan as a self-ruled island, democratic island of their security. So that's what I can say. And actually, the coverage was quite large.
America obviously has turned really quite anti-China from the surveys, for example, a recent Pew survey. So in the UK, there isn't so much this wholesale support of, I guess, democracies, the Taiwan democracy against China's communism.
Yes, that's indeed the case. Actually, in my observation, that the US, I use the word awareness of the China-Taiwan tension, has far ahead of the UK's awareness. I would suggest that it's also how US and UK to position themselves in the Pacific region. As you would be familiar with the previous president, not Trump, but Obama's Asia pivot, right? US has always been, apart from Trump, putting Asia as the key or the main area of their key security interest. And the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was to concentrate their force to prepare potential tension of China. So in many ways, that US actually put China as their priority. And then associatedly, Taiwan's understanding the initiative of the tilt in Indo-Pacific region. And China-Taiwan tension is the key in the Indo-Pacific stability in that view. But the understanding and supportive of the Taiwan democracy, I think it has a greater space to be improved in the UK as a whole.
For the UK, there was the release of the integrated review, refresh. I believe that was in March, and they mentioned Taiwan for the first time, and also described China as an epoch-defining challenge.
It's not just to talk about Taiwan, but also South China Sea disputes that was addressed in the integrated review refresh. So my understanding from reading of this very newly published governmental paper was to say that it's getting more of the understanding of the China-Taiwan, but that understanding still largely based on the concern and the fear of the rising China. It's important to understand better of Taiwan than to know what Taiwan is and can be supportive of. So I would say actually the UK's understanding of course, let's also again align with the geopolitical situation. UK's understanding of Ukraine has been lots higher than the understanding of Taiwan. Both are democracies, both are facing aggressive neighbors' threats. One has already been under war, one is very uncertain whether the aggressive neighbor will be using the military force.
How would you characterize the difference in approaches between the Rishi Sunak government administration and his predecessor, Liz Truss?
I still think that Liz Truss, their government was most vocal against China. That is true. Rishi Sunak continued as the predecessor Liz Truss government's vocal position against China, but in a way, probably less vocal, but doing more of the supportive action, hopefully, to support Taiwan. But I still would say that the overall government's understanding about Taiwan needs to boost it in that sense, because against China not necessarily means understanding Taiwan.
And you have mentioned that in terms of this understanding, trying to understand Taiwan, that you've been approached by some officials from the government?
Yes, that is also, well, I think that's it's due to because of the rising tension across the strait. So I've been approached by governmental officials from the FCDO Economic Directory or the Cabinet Office to ask the scholars' perspective about the cross-strait tension and issue. They wanted to know more about how do Taiwanese society see China, and how do Taiwan to position itself in terms of these potential threats. And in that sense, I think it is much encouraging signs to know that the government wants to know more about Taiwan.
How do you understand the UK's role in AUKUS, which is the Australian, UK, and US trilateral security partnership, given that, you know, it's, as we discussed, it's not so hawkish on China as the US is?
That is core to the Indo-Pacific stability. Let's align with the UK government's policy and also their claim and expectation. So that's one way. And another way is the government still not really so hawkish on China in the economic terms. So I can see the UK government is use this advantage of security-wise is very firm, determined, but economic-wise, we can see case by case in that sense. So one shouldn't really mix security hawkish with economic liberal situation with China.
That was Chun-yi Lee of Nottingham University speaking to me from the UK. As we heard, Bob Stewart suggested that Ma Ying-jeou shouldn't, as he put it, capitulate to Beijing while in China. My next guest, Yan Zhengsen, is a professor at National Zhengzhou University. Yan makes the case for what happened on Ma's visit to China in April, including the censorship of Ma's former title of President of Taiwan and the term the Republic of China, or ROC, which Chinese state TV erased from their coverage. Yan also promotes the 1992 consensus as a tool to demand the CCP democratize as a precondition for unification. Why does Beijing need to censor the name ROC or Taiwan?
You mean there are two countries. They can never accept that example I will use as Africa, Tanzania. Tanzania has two parts, the mainland part and then the island, Zanzibar. And the island has a president. The whole country has a president, no problem. But in mainland China, they just feel that if you have two presidents, then two separate countries. So they cannot accept that one.
So what do you think that does? Does it do anything in terms of Taiwan's international standing?
I don't think it would be a problem because that's a unilateral type of, trying to present a different kinds of wordings. I myself have been interviewed by mainland media before. They want me to use the mainland term, but I don't, so they would just cover that. For example, one time a Macau television station asked me about the 2012 presidential election in Taiwan. And you cannot use presidential election. I said, well, then I cannot say anything here. Or you want to cover with different words, that's fine. But I'm going to say presidential election. So some people will go along with this. I don't, but they still, it's your decision to do something to present to your audience, but I'm fine with my wordings as well. I think Ma, in a way, he knows this will be coming, but he doesn't care anymore because he is a ex-president, he is a civilian, he is not we call any kind of official capacity like a party chairman or honorary party chairman. And this trip is a private one. He's trying to describe what he has served as a president of the Republic of China or Taiwan. That's fine with him.
How about his own references, his own kind of censorship where he stopped short of giving EROC its full name? What do you make of?
Well, but he mentioned different things, right?
Yeah.
He mentioned about the Republican era, or when he signed his we call calligraphy about in the Sun Yat-sen Memorial in Nanjing. So he has a way to kind of in Taiwan we call playing something kind of like skirmish, just touching some sensitive part, but not really. It's going to be presented in Taiwan, maybe not in China, but that's good enough for Ma to return to Taiwan, at least what he has said something that is being argued that he would not say at all in China. So in a way, I think he has liberated himself in the sense that no longer as the leader of the country or the leader of the political party, he's free to say whatever he wants, and China is free to censor whatever they want, but he's going to say it, and they would not be able to stop him from saying something. Like you can see when he act with students, he still say something he likes. May not be presented in the Chinese media, but it's there. I think that's why he cares.
And so you're right that Ma is a former president, but he's still a senior within the KMT. How do you think this trip will build on the KMT's prospects or promotion?
I think he's trying to present himself as a peace ambassador because he felt that the 92 consensus was, first being initiated by Taiwan, and mainland China didn't want to accept. But eventually, mainland China felt this is a good idea of one China principle still being maintained, but different, interpretation. So Ma Ying-jeou felt that this is something that you can have to negotiate with China. I think this is his legacy because during his years, at least you have a lot of interaction economically, culturally, educationally, but also
tell us what's the wording of the 1992 consensus, because some people might not know.
Just basically both sides acknowledge there is only one China, but you can have your different interpretation, okay? Which is not in the wording, but also basically as a tacit agreement that I will not, try to challenge your interpretation. You will not challenge my interpretation.
Do you think Beijing goes along with that, though? I think that's...
Beijing, at least when you say the words one China principle, and we have different interpretation, Beijing will not continue to hit Taiwan and say, no, there is no different interpretation. Beijing will have its interpretation, Taiwan will have its interpretation, but at least I personally never heard Beijing challenge this, saying one China, they would say one China, peaceful unification or something, but they would not say the different interpretation cannot be said. Okay, so in that sense, that different interpretation is there. But this is a tacit agreement, is something that is not written, so a lot of people deny the existence. But here, I think, if you don't have that kind of tacit agreement, you cannot have all the negotiation during the 8 years of the KMT, or we call the diplomatic truce, which has been evidenced right now because of what we have lost, the diplomatic ally.
So the CCP, as we know, wants to unify with Taiwan.
Yeah.
Where does that leave the 1992 consensus?
Well, CCP always said, unification is an option, is a must, but they would like to achieve through peaceful means, right? But they would not exclude the military option. So peaceful means as long as you acknowledge this one China, then you can take decades, right? You can negotiate. We can argue that we want Taiwan. If you want to talk about unification, we want to see you have all kinds of basic freedom and democracy. That one day, if you achieve all those, maybe we can talk more about that, but we will monitor your progress on this level because we have been democratic, we have been free, so we cannot tolerate the earlier one about censorship. Like you cannot say this, you cannot say that. Basically, we have freedom of speech, and most importantly, we have freedom of religion, which China doesn't have, freedom of assembly. So you can use all kinds of democratic indexes to talk and negotiate with China, saying until one day, you reach this stage, then we might be talk about peaceful unification. But in the meantime, we can maintain that I will not declare independence, but I will somehow, make sure you are moving on this direction because we have been, very used to such kind of free and democratic environment, and it will be difficult or impossible for us to join an authoritarian system. I think that's that they can also accept, and maybe Chinese populace will also like to see that. Why? Because they want to see China democratize and become freer because they want to unify with Taiwan. So in other words, we can help China to become democratized and also to have greater freedom where the Western country couldn't do, but because they want to unify with Taiwan, so they might want to improve something.
I see. So do you believe that Ma believes in unification? That this is the ultimate goal?
Ma actually does believe believe in unification.
And does the KMT?
KMT, some people, but most people would say we want to maintain status quo. Status quo is moving toward unification or moving toward independence or status quo forever. A lot of people don't know, but people want it right now. It's status quo. But I think for Ma and other people would say status quo is okay, but that status quo needs to be in the context of not excluding unification in the future so that the status quo can be maintained. But if you don't want unification in the future, or at least give China some kind of illusion that there is a unification down the pipeline, then they will be impatient. They will try to use military force to force unification. So I think KMT want to offer a peaceful way out of this current tension.
That was Yan Zhengsen of National Chun-yi University speaking with me earlier. We also caught up with Sarah Atherton MP, who was part of the UK's all-parliamentary group led by Bob Stewart visiting Taiwan. Miss Atherton is a member of the UK Parliament's Defence Select Committee and tells me why her defence background drives her interest in Taiwan, which is under threat from China.
I'm the only sitting female MP in Parliament ever that's had a regular military background, and I sit on the Defence Select Committee, and for a short period under Prime Minister Liz Truss I was a Defence Minister for Defence People and Veterans. So obviously I've got a vested interest in our service personnel and defence in general. So these were the eyes that I was coming with to look at what's going on in Taiwan, given what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. And I need to make it clear that I'm not speaking for the government, I'm speaking as a parliamentarian backbencher. So it's my opinions I'm giving you now, but you know, you're a country living under threat. You're a country that has got strong democracy and a strong right to self-determination, and you're constantly living under this shadow with this date of 2027 being bandied around, and quite frankly I can't get over how calm you all are, but behind the scenes I know your politicians are working very hard to look at mitigation and what preparation they need to be doing just in case. So that's been a common theme that we've spoken about throughout, and of course we've had our integrated review refresh in the UK, and whereas 2 years ago to the UK, China, you know, we had a watching brief on China, but we were working with China. 2 years later, China is a systemic partner. We need to keep a much more watching brief on, and there's now investment going in to Whitehall to look at the UK-China situation. So, you know, China's a concern for all of us, but no more so than you. And of course, we've been looking at trade and the potential for defence procurement and trade, and I know that you work closely with the Americans, and I would not be surprised if we see over the next few years closer military ties with the UK. But as I say, that's my opinion.
We heard about the submarine parts which had been sold from the UK to Taiwan in 2022. It was a significant amount of trade, and much more than in previous years. So it appears that, you know, what you were saying might already have started. Can you tell me, you know, why is it in the UK's security interests to support Taiwan?
Well, we've got freedom of navigation on what you saw the last few years with the Carrier Strike Group, which was, you know, an international representation of the freedom of navigation, the freedom of democracy, the freedom of your right to decide your futures, and the backing that the rest of the world were trying to show Taiwan and the other nations in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea, that, you know, this is something that we take quite seriously. And, you know, defence and defence procurement and defence equipment is a global industry, and it's an industry that doesn't move very quickly. So you have to plan, and we certainly do in the UK. We plan 5, 10, 15, even 20 years ahead. Taiwan, you might not have that time. So you need to be planning quickly, and you need the support from your allies and partners to do that.
So Rishi Sunak had described China in the refresh, in the integrated review refresh, as an epoch-defining challenge. What does that mean practically for the UK?
Well, I don't know what that means to Rishi, but it certainly means for me in my work in the UK that we need to keep, you know, China hawks. We need to keep a watching brief on what's happening across the Indo-Pacific. And that's not just about defence, that's about trade, that's about cyber security, that's about human rights, that's, you know, that's the whole gambit of issues that we need to keep a watching brief on. And it's a very dynamic, complex situation. But as I mentioned before, you know, I've come here because I want to see and listen and understand how you feel, how you know, the people feel, how your politicians feel, because we read briefs from people, you know, all over the country who watch and try and tell us what's going on. But it's really good that we're here, and, you know, you've hosted us so well, because it's, you know, it's your lived experience that we need to know about, and then we can take that back to the UK Parliament.
We have recently in Taiwan extended conscription sort of military service from 4 months to 1 year. That went up in January. How would the UK see that sort of move? Is that enough?
I'm interested, I did ask the question about whether they were considering women in conscription. I got a vague response, I have to say. I didn't get a definite yes or no, but that's not surprising. But I got a lot of talk about how they're promoting women in the military, because that's something I do at home. My main focus of work in Parliament is to promote women in the defence industry. That includes women in the defence procurement, and also the military, and also to support our veterans. So if you ask my opinion, should women who are eligible be conscripted? Yes, they should be, because we want equality, and this is true equality.
Tell me more about, I understand that you have written a report into women in the military. Tell me, what were the conclusions of that report, and what other recommendations can you make to Taiwan, perhaps, given that it will be a culture change for this country?
So I was asked by the Defence Select Committee to look at why recruitment targets hadn't been met for consecutive years, and why women have been overrepresented in the complaint system. So I undertook an inquiry. I got agreement from the Secretary of State for Defence to speak to serving personnel, because under our Armed Forces rules, you're not allowed to do that. And in a 2-week window, I had nearly 10% of serving personnel, women, contact me with their experiences. And what they told us is 9 out of 10 women would recommend a career in the military, as I would. I was in the Cold War. I was in the intelligence corps way back in the 80s, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's certainly given me lessons and experiences to carry through all my life. And now at the age of 55, I'm in Parliament, still using those skills, still 5 minutes early, still with my shoes polished. So these are skills that women learn in the military, and I'm here to promote women in the military. And this is about equality. And they were the low-level things that we discussed, and the MOD have completely changed the way they look at women, and the way they treat women, and the way they provide for women, even so much so that they now provide wraparound childcare for serving women with children, because most married couples in the military, particularly the army, are dual serving. But we also found evidence of discrimination, harassment and bullying, and actually sexual assault to a lesser degree. And what the MOD have completely changed their way of reporting and complaining, because what we found was when a woman was complaining about behaviour by her male peers or superiors, there tended to be a lot of cover-up and marking your own homework.
And in the UK, there isn't conscription, it's voluntary. What percentage of the military is women?
12%, slightly higher in the RAF, slightly lower in the military, but on average 12%. The MOD have set ambitious targets or level of aspiration, as they keep reminding me it's not a target, 30% by 2030, and the RAF are looking at 40% women by 2030.
Wow, that's considerable jump, isn't it? And so by 2030, let's say if those targets are met, those aspirations are met, how would the military, UK's military, differ to what it is today?
I think it'll be more inclusive, more diverse. Women bring a different complementary skill set to men. I think it'll be a more modern establishment. The British military is one of our oldest male-dominated establishments, and I think if we're going to look forward, they want to recruit the best people. They don't want to positively recruit women. They just want to make it equal for women, because I very much believe in a meritocracy. So the best person gets a job, whether that's male or female. We just need to make sure that the women are in the room when the interviews are going ahead. So it's going to make it more modern, more progressive as we move forward, and it's going to be more around AI, cyber, more technical, I suspect, going forward. I think we're going to need a different type of military, and we do have an army transformation programme running in the UK at the moment, actually looking at our military and how we move from the Cold War, which is what I was in, to a modern, high-tech military, and do we need the same numbers? What skill mix do we need? What capabilities and what skills we need? And of course, women are 50% of the population. In fact, might be just slightly more. You know, there's a whole cohort there that the military are missing out on recruitment.
Not harnessing. So you mentioned that you were in intelligence during the Cold War. Do you think that the world is currently in a Cold War?
I think the world is more insecure and vulnerable than it's ever been. Yes, I do. I think, you know, there are certainly more places now that you wouldn't travel to. So I would probably say we're in a different type of Cold War, but a Cold War it certainly is.
And one where it's a bipolar world between the US, would you say, and then maybe China and Russia on the other side?
I think it's probably bipolar, not by nation, but by democracy. So if you're a democracy, you might be on one side. If you're more dictatorial, you might be on another.
The UK has been, you know, one of the fastest nations one of the first nations to supply Ukraine with heavier weaponry. Will that continue in order to give Ukraine a victory?
Well, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has said there's nothing off the table, and it's a moving feast. It's dynamic, and I think what European allies, NATO members, and the world need to think about is, you know, will Putin stop there? What's the end game? What's the end game for Putin? Obviously, President Xi's been there at the moment. What's that going to say? What is the end game for the Ukrainian people? That might be different to the Ukrainian politicians. And I think we just have to take every day as it comes. But they certainly need support because it's way into the second year now, and people will start to get tired. Morale is low. And I think nothing is off the table. They want jets. There's a lot of discussion in the UK now about jets, what type of jets, and the training. So the UK have started to train jet pilots. We'll see where that goes.
Is that on the F-16s?
Well, it's a sort of a basic, this is something that we've been trying to find out, what exactly are they training them on. A little bit evasive at the moment as to what exactly they're getting trained with. I think it's just the preliminary levels of their training. So we'll have to see. That's something we're watching as it materialises and trying to tease out the information from the MOD to get some direction of where they're really going. But certainly, you know, in my opinion, we should be giving Ukraine all the support because they're fighting a war on our behalf.
For democracy.
For democracy.
Sarah Atherton, thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hello, I'm Ian Kavat of Taiwan Talks. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Feel free to leave us any feedback in the comments section. See you next time.